You can get this. So your exam will open up after class this evening, and it will be due before next one. We'll go over a little bit more in the at the end of class, but it's going to be a mixture of multiple choice, short answer, and then one essay question. So I think there's like 25 multiple choice, about a dozen short answer, and then one big essay. And if you guys need more time to go over that stuff, let me know. If you don't have the book, let me know. That way I can at least make some copies of the book, of the first couple of chapters, for you if you need it. Other than that, I think it's going to be pretty straightforward, but we'll get to that at the end of class. Today we're going to be looking at Asia in this early modern era, even looking at the rise and pretty much the rise and fall of some of these storied empires that some people know a little bit about. Some people are pretty much out of the loop when it comes to Asian history. I know a lot of people, especially within the last 20 years, have really gone into Japanese culture, Japanese history, and even some Chinese history as well. One of my best friends, he really got into Chinese history, and now he works for ASU with the Chinese literature department, basically Chinese literature, and he goes and he recruits students to come here. I believe the this first exam comes from 9 and 10. During the break, I'll go grab the book. It's right outside, so I'll let you know the exact chapters. But this is one of my favorite topics. I really like this scope and this period of history, especially around this time. So let me get everything set up here. I'll go ahead and open up the chat. Chat box open. Oops. Where is it? Hold on. There it is. There's everybody's chat. Okay. All right. So first thing, of course, we start out with the question to the audience. What do you know about Asian history? Anyone? If you don't know anything, you can just say anything, nothing. But if you're sort of have any background or any sort of knowledge of Chinese or Japanese history, even Korean history, let me know. What all do you know about Asian history? China had many dynasties, definitely predates much of European history. It's okay not to know too much. The further east we get, I feel the less knowledge we have, even though it is one of the, especially in our lifetime, Japan and China have been some of the biggest partners in trade or in economics, things like that. A lot of people don't know a lot. So yeah, we're getting a lot. Don't really know very many. Japan was very closed off for centuries, yes. So I just like to get a baseline feel for what people don't know. Okay, good. And it's okay not to know much, because this is, of course, one of the reasons why a lot of people take it is to learn more of this stuff. So what we're going to do then is give a background. I'm not going to go too much over the geographic background, because I went over that in the lecture that's on the YouTube page. But what I really want to go over is the idea of the Chinese dynasties. As Carrie said, China has had many dynasties throughout the many millennia, and here are the Chinese dynasties themselves. From 2000 BCE all the way to 1911, you had a dynasty controlling China. So it wasn't, they call it the uninterrupted history of China, that there was someone in charge, that even if it were a warring period, there was at least some sort of central power that at least nominally had control, that at least had the ruling interests of China at heart. It wasn't like, for example, for the fall of the Roman Empire, you had these tiny fragmented kingdoms that come after that. Instead, China gives itself this long history of all of these different dynasties that rise and fall throughout the millennia. And one of the important things to know about China, one of the things that especially as a historian, it always fascinated me, is that from the very beginning, they were really big on keeping a historical record, whereas language in most civilizations was mainly built for creating laws and selling things. Language in China, excuse me, language in China was for both of those things, and also for writing down the history. They were very concerned with making sure that history was kept, that history was revered. And so because of that, we have this long uninterrupted line of different dynasties that even when you have warring factions, civil wars, you have a record of what came before it. And one of the biggest sins that could be committed in pre-modern China was to try and destroy the history, or try and destroy the books, because they felt a strong connection to the past and to what came before. So the Chinese dynasties rise and fall, and one of the ways that you can tell that some of these histories have been, let's say, fudged a little bit, is because of the fact that the cycles mirror each other so perfectly. Basically, you have a dynasty that rises, and then somewhere down the line, you have the beginning of the evil kings that are said to begin to turn away from the past, turn away from taking care of their people, and oftentimes you can definitely tell what a historian's bent is by how harshly they blame women for the fall of men. Usually an emperor, especially in the earlier dynasties, is said to fall under the sway of a woman, and because of that, he begins to turn away from the past. But it just happens this way. You have a ruler that becomes evil, and then all of a sudden you have to have people rise up against him. A new dynasty will come and rise up against him, and eventually will defeat the evil emperor and claim to be the new emperor. And in that regard, will take what is known as the mandate of heaven. So this idea of the mandate, I just learned how to do this. Mandate of heaven. What does that mean to you? If an emperor gives himself the mandate of heaven. Yes, Brian.
It's basically what the Europeans call divine right.
Can you expound on that?
So they were espousing that the god or the gods were directing that this particular individual has the divine right to rule over everybody.
Yes, exactly. Like he has this divine power to rule everyone, like he's above everyone else. Yes, and this is good because next week we're going to talk about the European equivalent. But yeah, this mandate of heaven means that he has been given authority by the heavens. That the ancestors, the spirits, whatever, whatever has come before has gone and given this new emperor basically the ability to move the country, the empire forward, the kingdom forward, and become the new emperor. So that's one of the important things, because the mandate of heaven can be broken by breaking the rules, by not following Confucian ideals, not following spiritual ideals. You can lose the favor of heaven. You can actually lose the backing of the divine forces above, and that is when people can rise up and rebel against the emperor. So that's one of the way, for the most part, that is the way that that Chinese history has evolved throughout the years, is that someone does something bad and he's overthrown. And it's really a fantastic idea and a fantastic way to keep continuity. Because obviously, if you think someone's doing evil and you fight against him and you lose, well, you didn't have the backing of the ancestors. You didn't have the backing of heaven, of the heavens. But if you win, then yes, you absolutely do. And so this goes on and on and on. And this is the way that Chinese history unfolds throughout the centuries, from the Xia in 2000 BC, all the way to the Qing in 1911. This is the way that it folds, except for one time. And that is right before the Ming Dynasty. So the Ming Dynasty is really a return to to Chinese normalcy. The Ming Dynasty is this return away from an interruption, a real interruption in their history, moving back to the way things used to be. The question to you guys is, what is this interruption that really changes China? Does anybody know who or what causes this interruption? That's right, Harry. The Mongols. The Yuan dynasty is this big exception to the rule. The Yuan dynasty begins with Genghis Khan. The great Khan takes his empire out from the steppes of Mongolia down through the entirety of China, down through basically all the way through India, Persia, what will become the Ottoman Empire, and begins to move towards Europe before he is struck down and has to go back. But after he passes away, his grandson will become the emperor of China. They will begin to break up the Mongol Empire, and Kublai Khan will become the emperor of a new Chinese dynasty, the Yuan dynasty. And one of the things about this is the reason for, well, this is actually the reason for, Brian said this is the reason for building the Great Wall. This is the reason for expanding the Great Wall. The wall had been there for a long time, but sort of very very piecemeal. So there are only certain sections that had a wall, because they didn't think anybody could actually go through most of the areas. And then Mongols come in and completely overrun everything. And so that's why you have to rebuild the wall and make it much stronger. So Kublai Khan and the Yuan dynasty basically controls all of this land. This portion here is modern day China. So, and the wall, I believe, is right around here. So you have all of this modern day China plus Mongolia plus parts even of modern day Russia. So they took all of this land. They even conquered most of the southern portions of China that had not been captured before, and so this great horde moves through and creates this new dynasty. Now the Mongols eventually begin to blend into Chinese society. They begin to become uh, much more like the Chinese. They begin to take some of their customs. They begin to take some of their religious beliefs, some of their um, cultural beliefs, because for the Mongols, it's a lot easier to just take someone's social beliefs, take someone's religion, than create and really just meld it with your own than it is to try and make other people follow you. They weren't really big on sharing a lot of their ideals, but they would take things from other people. That is not to say that the that is not to say that there was no art or anything built during this time period. You can see here that the Yuan actually did pottery. The Yuan actually were pretty became pretty good textile creators, clothing, pottery, uh, furnishings for houses became pretty desired outside of China during the Yuan dynasty. You also had the use of movable type. So something that we've talked about before when it comes to Europe and the Reformation in the 1500s was being used in the late 13 and early 1400s in China. At this time, it was used to quickly type up edicts, quickly type up reports that needed to be done. It was mainly a tool for bureaucracy. And then also during the Yuan period, you had this rise in education and mathematics. You had geometry and calculus, trigonometry. These large scale math operations that are just kind of above my comprehension were pretty common in the universities of the Yuan at this time. So just like the Middle Ages in Europe are not an entirely backwards time, the age of the Mongols in China isn't completely backwards. They do have some real movements and real progress in the arts and in technology, but it's just really slow going, and it really sets sets China back by quite a bit. And so you have the Yuan dynasty, you have the Mongols in charge, and then what happens is you start having things like famine, disease, earthquakes, typhoons, everything that has happened for centuries, but usually you have a strong central government that is there to basically help the people out by storing grain, by keeping food in reserve, by being able to move people around. The Mongols aren't really big on that. The Mongols really don't care too much about other people. The Mongols care about themselves. They're not really big on storing. They're not really big on planning ahead. And so you have widespread famine, widespread death. And this leads to the rise of Zhu Yuanzhang. And Zhu Yuanzhang is a commoner, that his family's killed. He moves to a monastery, and all of his fellow monks are killed, and so he ends up going in with a rebel group known as the Red Turbans. And this rebel group, the Red Turbans, are basically are going to be a continuation and really a stop of a lot of secret societies that go throughout China for centuries. The White Lotus, the Red Turbans, the Harmonious Fists. All of these are going to be names that you see throughout history, and they really are a major player in Chinese history. These secret societies, even in popular culture, you hear a lot of about if you watch stories about China or watch any sort of the martial arts films about China, the Hong Kong movies about China, there's always these secret societies, always these underground societies that control things or that cause a lot of damage, terrorist cells, things like that. And this is because China has a huge history of this. And so the Red Turbans are just a continuation of this idea, but since they are eventually victorious, they're sort of seen as the rebels, as the heroes, kind of like the Star Wars rebels. They are the gritty underdogs that eventually topple the giant empire. And the way that they do things is through small strikes in cities against the yuan, small scale operations, and basically coming out of nowhere, striking against the yuan, and then disappearing in the shadows. This works for a while, and it sort of sticks it to the Mongols for a little bit, but it never really does any major damage. Does anybody know? Can anybody guess why, or talk about why these small scale attacks would really not be viable in the long term? Let's say you are trying to get rid of an invading force in these small, and you are just doing these small scale operations. Why would this not really be an effective use of your time? Let's see. Let me see. So Stone, let's see. You're the first person I saw. So why do you think, there's no wrong answer here, why do you think that this really wouldn't be an effective strategy?
Because they're just small attacks and it's not really going to do a lot of damage compared to a longer full-scale attack that might do a lot of damage, because little attacks leave room for you to recoup and even prepare for the next small attack.
Anyone else? Yes, Brian?
Widely distributed governing.
That's right. That's right. So you have these small scale attacks that do some damage, but it could easily be, you could easily recoup and then just basically double the amount of damage that you do against the rebels. And then you don't really have this, you're not really building anything if you're a rebel force. If you're just striking and then hiding in the shadows, you're not really accomplishing much without gaining actual land, without actually taking control of cities and beginning to create these networks of control. So if you want to look at why a lot of these secret societies, a lot of these terrorist cells, a lot of these operations like this don't work, and we're going to be seeing a lot of that here throughout the next few hundred years, it is because of this. because of the fact that you are only doing short-term damage. You really need to have a legitimate fighting force to gain ground and take control. And that's what happens with the Red Turbans. They're lucky enough to have a great leader. They're lucky enough to have Zhu Yuanzhang, who not only is he a great leader, but he's also motivated. You know, he's out for revenge. He's out to strike back. It's personal now with him against the leaders of the Yuan, and so he basically takes his force and turns them into an army. He begins to have some of the Mongol, the Yuan, actually, join with him. And one of the things that I found fascinating, and I've always found fascinating, is that about a third of his army ends up actually being Mongol. They decide, okay, we're just going to join you. We don't want to fight against you anymore. We respect you. We like you. We're just going to go ahead and join you. So up to a third of his force is Mongol, and they are able to actually take it to the Yuan and eventually defeat the Yuan. And he becomes the Hongwu Emperor. And I just found out, I was looking for pictures for this PowerPoint, and I found that they actually have this like lifelike action figure here. That's not that's actually a little like a doll, like kind of like a very realistic doll. It's kind of weird. And I looked at it on eBay. It's like $400. I was like, oh, that's a bit too much. Otherwise, I could use it stop motion for my next class. But I really like the story of the Hongwu Emperor, as he calls himself, the Hongwu Emperor, the bountiful warrior, the Hongwu Emperor, because he came from nothing, really built himself up, and then, he really got people behind him, and basically was able to turn the tide against the Mongols and proclaim himself this Hongwu Emperor. And then he didn't stop there. He continued into Mongolia, because he knew if he left the Mongols alone, if he left them go back, then the Mongols would basically recoup and come back later on in force. So he storms into Mongolia, burns the capital to the ground. The capital has never been rebuilt. Karakorum is actually now a little village out in the middle of nowhere in Mongolia. There's a UNESCO World Site where it used to be. There was talk of rebuilding it, sort of creating a new city, but they figured it would cost way too much money to build a whole new city there. So they just have it's sort of just gone into everybody kind of ignores the fact that they said, oh yeah, we're going to build a great city here. And then he goes into Russia as well and creates this basically goes into here in Russia, parts of what is now Russia, and basically tells them that they have to pay tribute to him. So he has taken complete control. The Ming are now in charge, and Hongwu continues to reign for 30 more years, and his oldest son is his successor, but his oldest son passes away before Hongwu does, and so instead of giving it to his giving the rule to his next son, he gives the rule to his eldest son's son, kind of really reinforcing this idea of the patriarchal line. And at this time, a lot of people are upset about how he's set up the successorship. So he begins to He begins to not only take people's lands away, he begins a purge. He begins to rid the court of eunuchs. He doesn't trust eunuchs, so he gets rid of them. He moves them away, takes away their money, their land, everything, and then he dies. And his grandson here, Jian Wen, comes in and tries to apologize, tries to reverse a lot of these decisions, but by that point, they've made a lot of enemies, and so you have the rise of the Yongle Emperor. He is Hongwu's third son. His oldest died, and his second died as well. And then here comes the uncle of Jian Wen. His name was Zhu Di, and then he becomes the Yongle Emperor, and he begins to build a navy that's going to go throughout the Indian Ocean. And he's going to be creating all of these great public works projects, which we'll look at more. Something like this, which is known as the Porcelain Tower. It was at least 100 foot. At least 100 feet tall, covered top to bottom with porcelain, so it would shine brightly in the sun. And at night, they would have at least 1,400 candles lit around it, so it would still glow in the middle of the night. It was just something that he did to create a spectacle and create something grand. So he was all about spectacles and all about things being grand. And one of those things was the treasure voyages. Zhang He and the treasure voyages. So, Zhang He is one of the greatest admirals in history. He was one of the right-hand men of the Yongle Emperor, and he was Muslim. He was part Mongol. He was a eunuch. All of these things that a lot of the people especially in the Hongwu Emperor's court, detested. The Hongwu Emperor tried to get rid of eunuchs. The Yongle Emperor embraced eunuchs and brought them back in. And so that was the reason why he gained a lot of power very quickly, is that the eunuchs had a lot of influence in the court. And before we go any further, I ask this to you: what is a eunuch? What is a eunuch? Does anyone want to? That's right, a castrated man. In the Mongol court, and then later on in the court of the Yongle Emperor, you had hundreds of eunuchs that were in charge of running the court, running the royal palace, and running a lot of the treasury. So castrated man. So what does that mean? I mean, what does it mean for you to be a man that is being castrated? What is it now that you can't, that can't happen, basically? That's right. Your testicles have been removed. And so, so Elijah says, you can't have any kids. So if you can't have any kids, why would they do that? One of the main reasons that people say this is that there were a lot of concubines and a lot of women in the court that were basically off limits to anyone but like the emperor and the top and the top counselors, and they didn't want anybody else sleeping with them and basically gaining secrets or giving away too many secrets with the women. And so, that's why they had these eunuchs, because they were like, oh, they don't have any sex drive, so they are not going to, they're not going to sleep with these women, impregnate them, or give too much pillow talk and spill state secrets. And so eunuchs were given that, not really realizing that even if you are castrated, especially crudely castrated like that, that you still have some sort of sex drive. It's just very, very diminished. And yes, as Brian said, you had no intent to build their own dynasty. If they can't have children, they really can't. It's really gross. But if you can't have any children, then you don't have anything to really, pass on. And in Chinese society, it's very heavily Confucian. And Confucianism basically says that you have a hierarchy, that the only way for society to continue and to prosper is to honor this hierarchy. So you have this the emperor with his subjects, the father with his kids, father with his wife, mother with her children, brother to brother, friend to friend. There are all these relationships. And if you are a eunuch, you're basically, forgive the pun, you're basically cut off from that hierarchy. If you can't have kids, then you cannot have anyone that is subservient to you in that way. Literally cut off. And so because of this, eunuchs were basically felt as they were no threat by some of the people that are seen as they were no threat, that you could just give them all of this control over money and control over bureaucracy, and they would have no desire to cheat or no desire to take anything for themselves, because they were not real men. And only real men had the drive to make a better life for themselves. And as we're going to see later on, that is far from the truth. As what happens if, let's say you people here that are with you, if you don't have any children, you have nothing to look forward to after you die, then what do you do with your life? Incentive, yes. No incentive to do this. Well, if I have no children coming, if I have nothing to look forward to, then I try to make my life as great as possible at this time. And that's what happens in a lot of these cases, or that's the way that it is shown by the historians of China. Obviously, they have a bent, but basically the eunuchs. The eunuchs realize that they have no future people to look forward to, so they create a system outside of the hierarchy, outside of polite society, where they basically can live life as hedonistically or as wantonly as possible. So they make themselves outside of society, and corruption grows because of this. The desired effect is turned on its head here. So that brings us to Zhang He, who was he himself a eunuch. Zhang He was castrated because he was a slave. And he kept trying to escape, and he kept trying to fight back. And so slavers castrated him when he was between 10 and 15 years old to try to break his spirit. And it never really did. And he ends up being a slave to the Yongle Emperor. And the Yongle Emperor actually likes the fact that that he is brash and likes to talk back and isn't afraid to speak his mind. And pretty soon, Zhang He rises up through the ranks and becomes the admiral of the Ming Navy. And so they begin, and as the admiral of the Ming Navy, he begins to set out to revisit all of these lands. Throughout the century and a half of Mongol rule, there'd been no real exploration. There'd been no real trade throughout the Indian Ocean. And so they begin to move out using a lot of the old maps. Like the Portolani that were used by Portuguese, Spanish sailors, the Ming sailors used ports like this, or excuse me, used maps like this that showed ports, that showed where there was dangerous terrain, that showed where it was safe to go through. And you can see that these are very exaggerated maps. In some cases, in other cases are sort of not. So what landmarks can you guys hear? Oh, Brian, we'll get to that in a second. So what landmarks can you guys hear? What land masses can you guys see here in this map? Let's see. Yeah, you see the Korean Peninsula. Let's see. This big one, anyone? There's an easy one. What is this big one here? Let's see. I'm typing it out, or I'll call on someone. Okay. So Jackie, what's this big landmass here? Can you guess? Let me unmute you. There you go.
I'm really bad with this.
So if Korea is
Sorry.
here, what's right next to Korea?
Yeah.
Let's say Mongolia is here. What is that?
Well,
Yeah.
Isn't like
This is China.
it,
This is China proper. Look at all how detailed it is. You can tell that they really wanted to be able to navigate not only in the ocean but also throughout the rivers of China. So you can kind of see all the little rivers here and all the little cities. This is China and the mainland. Look how much bigger they've made it than the other land masses. Look how much bigger they've made the Korean Peninsula. So this is really big and really important. What's funny is that they sort of have skipped India. India should be, so I guess it's sort of all blended in together, because I think right here is Sri Lanka. So this is sort of India going into China. Anybody else see any other landmass? Here you have Japan. Here you have the Arabian Peninsula. It looks like Italy, right? But it's the Arabian Peninsula. And this right here is Africa. So the Chinese, I believe this map goes back to the first millennia AD, so around between 500 and 1000 AD. But they already knew that Africa was there. They didn't, they only knew parts of it, but they knew that Africa was there. They knew the Arabian Peninsula, India, China, Korea, and Japan. So these treasure voyages weren't about discovery. They knew all this stuff already. They knew all these places. China and India, they really knew, intimately. Korean Peninsula, they didn't really know Japan too well. Or at least they didn't care enough about it. But they knew parts of it. If you look at this right here on this map of Africa, that's the Nile River. So the Chinese knew about the Nile. The Chinese knew about a lot of different geographical locations. So they weren't isolated. They were not an isolated culture. It was just that the Mongols came in and basically isolated themselves. And so, as I mentioned in the class, in the lecture online, these were huge expeditions. These were expeditions that started in about in the early 1400s, so decades before the Portuguese started. And this basically, you had a voyage of over 300 ships during their initial explorations out. 300 ships with over 27,000 sailors. And their biggest ships were known as the treasure ships, which were over 4 times the size of Columbus's biggest ship. So number one, this shows you exactly what the Chinese were going for, that they were showing their force. They were showing that they were a force to be reckoned with, but it also shows you how little faith the Spanish actually had in Columbus, that they give him such a tiny ship and such a small crew. So I believe the Nina and the Pinta were only about 2/3 the size of this one. This is his biggest ship. So they gave him 3 tiny ships. Meanwhile, the Chinese are going through the ocean on these massive liners, these gigantic ships, and they would go throughout. If you notice up here, you can see up at the top right. Anyone see this guy up top? This giraffe. They actually made it, so they made it to Madagascar, made it to Africa, and they brought back a giraffe. The first time a giraffe had been seen in China. They actually gave it to the emperor. Zheng He gave it to the emperor, but they didn't realize that giraffes have a very particular diet, can only survive on certain plants, and so the poor giraffes died in the imperial court. But their remains were kept there as sort of this curio from Africa. And they would actually, how did they literally capture a giraffe? They made it to Africa, and it was actually given to them by I can't remember who it was, but they met some tribes there, and the tribesmen actually came back with a giraffe to China because they saw Zheng He with these 300 ships with all these men, and Zheng He tells them, "Oh, I have a boss too. You should meet him." So these people wanted to meet the boss of this guy who just came in with all of these ships. And so a lot of them would go back. Some you had people from Indonesia, from Papua New Guinea, from islands off of India and Africa that actually came back to China and stayed in China for a while. So it was this massive exchange of culture, massive exchange of ideas that happens in the early 1400s. And one of the big stories I really, there's a little bit of evidence, but not too much evidence, but there is the evidence of a ship, of a Chinese ship getting lost and rounding the Cape of Good Hope. I think that's what it is, or Cape Horn, I can't remember. Around Africa and actually getting stranded in the Atlantic Ocean. One of the big ships got stranded. And they really wanted to continue to go west, but they got a little skittish and decided to turn back and try to make it back to to Africa, back to China. But you have this gigantic ship full of people, full of soldiers, full of goods that's in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and headed for South America. This map here is kind of disputed a little by historians. They're iffy on its origins and its truthfulness. But I like to think of that idea as something that leads us to one of these other what ifs of history. You know, what if the Chinese sailors had decided to keep going and made it to South America, made it to Brazil, to the coast of South America in 1420. You know, 80 years before the Portuguese got there. It is one of those things that you really look at. It could have been a turning point. So that's 80 years before the Portuguese. That is 80 years of the disease getting there. It is a very interesting alternate history, and it's something that I think about as a historian, that you're not supposed to really, talk about what didn't happen. You're supposed to talk about what happened, but this is one of those sort of different offshoots of history, that what could have happened here with a Chinese presence in the New World. It's one of those fascinating things. In our reality here, the Chinese basically stop around 1435. They no longer continue to expand outward. About 1435, you have the sort of patrolling of the Indian Ocean, patrolling of the South China Sea, trade in the Indian in East Asia and in Southeast Asia, and that's basically it. Not even in the Pacific Ocean do you see a lot of Chinese ships. Basically, by 1435, here's the question that I was going to ask. Really, about 1435, you have this this idea of just sort of staying in their own zone. And the question I wanted to ask you guys is, how connected do you see the world today? Like, with you right now, what sort of goods do you see from other places? What can you see? I'll go with Jack. Jack, do you have anything that's that comes from outside of the United States?
Like in front of me right now?
Yeah, anything around you.
Geez. I mean, I don't know. I feel like most electronics are from outside the United States.
Yeah, most of the components, yeah, right there. Boom, from outside the United States. So you have something that has been touched by someone in China, basically. Anyone else? Anyone have anything that's not an electronic good that is around you, that comes from, even if it's Canada, Mexico, somewhere just outside of the United States?
I have a little like flute thing from somewhere in South America.
Oh, that's cool. Clothing, yeah, clothing coming. A lot of clothing is manufactured in Mexico or in India, something like that. Jackie likes some K-pop. Apparently, she's got some albums from Korea. Food, yes, there you go. Lots of our food comes up from South America. Nail polish from Iran. That's cool. Yeah, there you go. Cars. Actually, yeah, my car is from Japan. It's right outside. Dishes. So you guys see how connected your world really is. That's, just looking around, you can see things from other countries, things that you might not have even you might not even have been to these other countries that they're coming from. I've never been to China, but I have Chinese goods on my desk right now. So, so this connection of the world is something that we think about as being a modern thing. Now, this is something that we think about as being something that has only happened in the 20th century. But really, when you go far enough back, if you look at the 1400s, beginning of the 1500s, you begin to see a lot more of a connection from Asia all the way to the Americas. And when European sailors make it to Africa, they find Chinese goods there, and they continue to go on. And some of those sailors will bring back Chinese goods from Africa, from India into Europe. And so people in Europe really want a lot of stuff from the Ming people. And you start seeing Ming goods being wanted throughout there you go. You see Ming goods being wanted throughout Europe. And one of the main things that people wanted was this porcelain vases, porcelain plates, especially tea plates. Tea started becoming big in Europe during the 15 and 1600s. And so sailors would try to find some of these Ming goods. They would try to bring them back, and eventually only the richest of the rich could afford this. Nowadays, you see a lot of this type of material, and most of the porcelain work like this is once again made in China again, but this time in industrial factories, and it's not as high quality. However, every now and then you find stories of people that were like, oh, these were my great grandmother's plates. We just kept them, and they take them to like an antique roadhouse or something. And it turns out that they're actual Ming vases from the 1500s, and they're worth millions of dollars. And so that's a nice surprise. So if you know someone that has goods like this, check underneath. If it doesn't have a stamped made in China or made in Britain, you might have something. So take it to Antiques Roadshow when they start coming back around again. You might be a millionaire, and remember me for giving you the idea. So goods begin to be given out from the Ming in this time, and the Ming begin to become wealthy. And the Ming use this wealth to create things like the Forbidden City. And I'm going to pause this real quick. I'm going to play this video if it works. There you go.
Legend has it that from the heavens came the inspiration for the Forbidden City, the earthly counterpart to the celestial home of the gods.
Not seeing it yet, Carlos. Still seeing the PowerPoint.
All right, let me stop the share and share. There you go. How about now? Has it started?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Legend has it that from the heavens came the inspiration for the Forbidden City, the earthly counterpart to the celestial home of the gods. 600 years later, it retains much of its mystique.
As its name implies, the Forbidden City was forbidden to all but royalty until the fall of the imperial dynasty in 1911. Trespassing was punishable by death, a very high price to pay.
Beyond the imposing moat is a majestic complex that took 14 years and 1 million workers to create. Spanning more than 7 million square feet, its scale, details, and beauty are unparalleled.
我虽然呢，今年呢快70岁了，但是呢。
Even though I'm close to 70 years old and have come here since I was a small boy, this remains a mysterious place. To me, the Forbidden City is like a treasure book that one must take their time reading to fully understand its legends and superstitions.
The Chinese have some very interesting ancient beliefs. One of the more common ones has to do with thresholds, as the Chinese believe that evil spirits travel along only flat surfaces. Most homes, including this great imperial palace, have raised thresholds to prevent those evil spirits from entering your house. In the Forbidden City, every detail was planned and had a philosophical or practical meaning, right down to the tiny roof accents, where the number of statuettes indicate the importance of the building.
故宫的每一座宫殿，每一间房屋里
Every hall, every courtyard is a feast for the eyes. I've been here too many times to count, yet each time I approach the gates, I can't wait to come back inside.
Welcome to my beautiful Beijing.
Come explore the majesty of the Forbidden City with Viking. Let us share with you.
So, so yeah, just a hint for anybody that's going to be a teacher or a history teacher. If you want to get a really fast, concise history, use travel sites. They'll give you like a 2-minute video that gives you all the big, all the talking points that you need. But that's really cool, Jack, that you've been to the Forbidden City. It's one of my bucket lists, and since I'm going to have an excess of flyer miles by the time we can actually travel again. This might be one of my trips that I'll take. So the Forbidden City comes out of the Ming wealth, the ability to have wealth, and also the population boom that happens after the fall of the Mongols. The Mongols were not too keen on sanitation, on health, on not killing people when they wanted to. And so the population in China had dipped, but now with the Ming coming in and needing more people to work in cities and work to repair and reinforce the Great Wall of China, you saw a massive boom of in population and a massive boom in economic power. And one of the things that they used with that economic power was creating the Forbidden City for the emperor. Now, just like we talked about earlier, however, you have the issue with the eunuchs. This is a woodcut from the time period, so this is what people sort of thought eunuchs look like. This is what people this is sort of a caricature of a eunuch, someone that's ugly, that is overweight and just sort of kind of disgusting. And that's the way that people felt about the eunuchs. And so, I mean, imagine this is what people think of you, yet they are giving you power in the bureaucracy, power to run taxes, run part of the treasury. A lot of the eunuchs would basically turn their backs on Ming society by taking as much as they could get away with from them, and really spreading bureaucracy, spreading misinformation, sort of being as much of a nuisance to Ming society as they could because of this. So it ended up being this self-fulfilling prophecy that people mistrusted the eunuchs, so they treated them well. They didn't treat them well, and so the eunuchs ended up lashing back by acting as the way that people expected of them too. So it's sort of this corruption really grows from within, and pretty soon the Ming are hemorrhaging money. The Ming are beginning to lose a lot of money, and so they need to open up to the West. And once in the early 1500s, once the West begins to make it into Southeast Asia, the power of the Ming has waned. And so you have these port cities in China being given to Europeans as their port cities. You have Hong Kong given to the Dutch and Macau given to the Portuguese. They basically the Portuguese set up in Macau and negotiate with the Ming to run the city, or at least run the ports. And Hong Kong is just pretty much straight up bought by the Dutch. And just like in Southeast Asia, the Portuguese and the Dutch do not make themselves very welcome in China. You have the coming of missionaries by the Portuguese, overzealous missionaries that begin to convert people to Christianity. They begin to proselytize and get people to become Christians. Not only become Christians, but also to begin to destroy shrines, crash temples, and basically become a really big thorn in the side of Confucianist scholars, Buddhist monks, and the government at large. And so the Portuguese quickly fall out of favor. The Dutch move in, and the Dutch don't convert people because they don't care. They they don't know. They feel these people are probably going to hell anyway. So instead, they buy up land and they have better relations with the Chinese. But just like in Southeast Asia, the Dutch are not really willing to change any of their ways. Not really willing to make any sort of concessions to the Ming. And so with this foothold that the Portuguese, that the Dutch begin to hold onto China, you start seeing the encroaching influence of the West. You start to see the West begin to sell goods to China, especially guns, cannons. The lack of fighting in the preceding years after the fall of the Ming, or excuse me, of the Yuan, meant that the Chinese were sort of falling behind in the global arms race, and so the Portuguese came with nice brand new guns, and the Chinese began to buy them. The Chinese had a lot of silks, a lot of good textiles, a lot of fine clothes, and just nice little curios that the West really wanted. And so you after 1500, you find silver from the Americas in China. You find Chinese porcelain in the Americas, especially as richer Europeans begin to move over to the Americas. And so finally, during the time of the Ming, you have this this beginning of global trade. The beginning of a global economy. This is truly a global system. So really about this time is when you start seeing people having things that are that can have their origins in an entire world away in their very homes. Usually these are the extremely rich, but it is a new world, and the Ming, unfortunately, do not really make it very far into this new world. And we'll discuss that after our break. We'll go into the Qing for a little bit, and then finish off with Tokugawa Japan. So we'll take here about a 5-minute break. So come back about 7:49, and we'll reconvene. All right. And we will resume our recording. Okay, so like I said, the Ming aren't really going to make it out of this early modern period. You're going to have the Ming in the middle of the 17th century, so into the 1600s. You will have the Ming basically go back through the cycle of ebbs and flows of dynastic history, and they begin to become the bad guys of the story. Corruption runs wild through the Ming. You have famine, war, you have natural disasters. And so the Ming begin to heavily tax the poor. They begin to ignore the plight of the people. And so this leads to an uprising that eventually is led by a Ming general known as Li Zicheng. And Li Zicheng is going to rebel against the Ming and begin to march towards the capital. At the same time, you have the people of Manchuria, the Manchu people, begin to march down towards the capital, because what had happened was this area here, Manchuria, had been ignored since the early 1600s. Korea was disputed between Japan and China, and so the Japanese launched an attack, and the Chinese came and fought with the Koreans stuck in the middle. And then after that, after the peace, the Chinese government, the Ming government, decided that they were going to ignore this area here, basically. And so the Manchu people were left to their own. And for decades, they had to deal with nomads coming in, with raiders, with incursions from Korea even. And so the Manchu felt that they were left alone. And so they begin to march towards the capital as well. As Li Zicheng marches in, they're both going after the Ming emperor. So the Ming are going to have to fight against this rebellious force. They're going to have to send people up to the north, and pretty much the reinforcements don't come in time. And so Zhang Wen, the last Ming emperor, is basically going to kill his family and then kill himself. Because one of the things that traditionally happens if you are an emperor is that you are killed, decapitated, and your family is basically sold into slavery, just to get rid of your bloodline, to make sure that you can't come back. And so with this, Li Zicheng becomes the new emperor, and Prince Dorgan, and creates the Shun Empire, which lasts a few months. So he takes over this part of the Ming. The loyalist Mings run down into the south of China, and then you have the Manchu moving in towards the capital. So because of this killing of the emperor, or the emperor killing himself, the Manchu all of a sudden are telling everybody that they're here to avenge the honor of the Ming. They're here to basically coming in to restore order, that the Shun dynasty is not legitimate. And so they come in, and you have one man that stands between the Manchu and the new Shun dynasty. That man is a Ming general named Wu Sangui. And basically Wu Sangui is up at the, up here in part of the wall. The capital is here. And so basically all the Manchu have to do is get that one guy to let them in. There's one thing about walls is they're only as strong as the weakest gate. And so Wu Sangui makes an alliance with the Manchu and he lets them in. And so the Manchu immediately fight against the Shun and completely defeat them. And by 1645, the Shun have been defeated and Li Zicheng is dead or disappeared. And then after that, Wu Sangui decides to try and create a new empire down in the south of China. And so the Manchu basically hunt him down and kill him. So he tried to triple cross a double cross, and you never triple cross a double cross. That just ends up bad for you. And so Li Zicheng disappears from history. Prince Dorgan of the Manchu takes over, and you have the beginning of the Great Qing Empire. And when people think of traditional Chinese, especially here in the United States, it is the Qing that you think about, with the top knot, the long braid, flowing silk gowns. A lot of the food has its origins in northern China, in Manchuria, and that is because it is the Qing that are really in charge of China when you have the first wave of immigrants from China coming in to the West, coming into the United States. And so this is why the Chinese, the way that the classical Chinese that we think of is usually looks like the Qing, because they are the ones that make this first contact with the Western Hemisphere later on in the 1800s. Yes, Brian is correct. The Qing are eventually going to be the ones that build the railroads in the United States. So, but that is at the low point of the Qing. Here is the Qing at their high point. When they finish a lot of the great projects that the Ming had started but had run out of money on, they begin to create these new cities. They begin to build up the military. You see a lot of battles between the Qing and the people of Korea. You see a lot of incursions into Mongolia and down into the south of China, where remnants of the Ming, where rebels begin to fight, begin to rise up. The Qing put them down with great efficiency. You also have the rise of scholar emperors like Kangxi, who are going to be much more conscious of the changing world. Kangxi is going to open up the ports to, or at least one port to the West and begin to trade with the West. He's going to begin to fix the prices of a lot of things. And he's actually going to get the East India companies to basically acquiesce to the prices, because really about this time, early 1600s, is when tea mania is running wild in Europe. Now, Europe, we think of especially Britain, we think of tea as something, as as their drink. And that really doesn't start till about this time, where tea just becomes a lot easier to obtain. It becomes a lot more desired, and basically, let's not beat around the bush. Everyone gets addicted to caffeine, that sweet, sweet caffeine. And so Europeans begin to love tea, and the Chinese have the best tea, the most might not even be the best tea. It's just the most, the rarest of the teas, the green teas, rose teas, things like that, that are greatly desired, especially among the rich in Europe. And so the Ming, or excuse me, the Qing emperor understands this and begins to really drive the prices up and make much more money for the Qing. And so during this time period, you have a lot of money coming into the Qing Empire, and you also have a lot of stratification in society. You have traditional Manchu culture coming back in and reaffirming things like Confucianism, like the importance of family and clan. You have what is known as the Han Chinese, or the more central Chinese, begin to have to live in a separate system than the Manchu. The Manchu have their own laws. The Manchu have their own bureaucracy. In the lecture online, this is what I call the diarchy, where you have a dual monarchy. Basically, there is a system for the Manchu, and there's a system for everyone else. And so the Manchu keep their traditional culture, keep their traditional dress, and pretty much keep themselves separate from the rest of China. They keep themselves above the rest of China, while at the same time pushing forward traditional Chinese views, pushing forward traditional Chinese government and philosophy like Confucianism, bringing back that hierarchy, getting rid of the eunuchs, and eventually outlawing castration to get rid of the influence of eunuchs, and basically recreating Chinese society and making it something much more powerful. And so the Qing, because of the way that they deal with the West, they become demonized by the West. And here is a political cartoon from later on in the time period, as we'll be looking at in a few weeks. But this is what the West began to think of the Chinese as. It was known as the Yellow Scare. This idea that the Chinese were coming to get us, that the Chinese were evil, that the Chinese needed to be stopped. And this occurs because of the power of trade that the Chinese have. Yes, Brian, this is actually tied to the division of language in China, but that comes much later on as Southern Chinese Cantonese becomes much more different than the northern dialect. But this is the beginning of that. But yeah, this is the reason why the Chinese are vilified, is because of their power in trade, their power throughout Asia. They begin to have much more power in Southeast Asia. And then you'll start seeing them limit European involvement in China, begin to squeeze them out of Macau, begin to close up Hong Kong, and basically leave them only with Canton as the way to trade. And so there's only one port where ships can trade, and there's only a limited amount of goods that can be traded to Europe. And so it's a first come, first serve basis, and you'll have ships from different countries, from England, from the Netherlands, from Portugal, etc., trying to make up camp in the in Chinese ports. So smuggling rises, smuggling and black market rises, and pretty soon a much harsher punishment will come to the Chinese, but we'll get into that in a few weeks. So basically, China becomes a target for other people. Here's a political cartoon from later in the 18th century that kind of shows people looking to take parts of China away. China, under the Qing, becomes the enemy of the East. and it becomes a target of the East as well. But we'll get into that later on. And then finally, we get to the role of women in Qing era China. In Manchu society, traditionally women were much more equal to men. And you will see this a lot in nomadic societies, in much rougher societies. When life is tough, everyone has to be treated the same and everybody has to contribute the same. But once you get to a certain level of comfort, then this strong patriarchal society takes hold, and that's what happens with the Qing, especially going into the 18th century, as women begin to lose a lot of that equality. They still are able to read, and they can still be able to learn how to write as well, but for the most part, that's left up to nobility, to the richer women in society. If you are a poor Chinese, then basically you are working in either small factories, or you are working creating clothing, creating other textiles. So you don't have that same opportunities as richer women. You still have the ability to make money and work in jobs, but that begins to erode less and less as Chinese society becomes much more conservative. Chinese society becomes much more closed off. And basically women are now in a much more subservient place and really can't advance in society very well, except at the very, very top, where you actually have the Empress Shishi take over towards the end of the Qing Empire, but her story will wait for another day. Does anybody have any questions about China before we move on and finish up with Japan? The story of the Qing is one that is of a nation that doesn't see the end coming to it. It doesn't see all the enemies at the gates. It feels that it is untouchable, but it will pretty soon show that that by closing themselves off, by limiting their interactions with the West, they will allow the West to prosper where they don't prosper. And now we get to Tokugawa Japan. And one thing to note before we move on is that whenever you look at Japanese history, you will often see two different names for each of the time periods, because you can either name it after the ruling clan or the ruling shogun, or you can name it after the palace where that shogun came from. So for example, Tokugawa, Japan is named after the Tokugawa clan. However, you can also, you've also probably heard of it by the name of the palace of Edo, where the Tokugawa held power. And so Edo period Japan is the same as Tokugawa Japan, and they are used interchangeably by historians of Japan. So Tokugawa Japan or Edo Japan. The first thing we need to know to kind of go over is the shogun system. The shogun system. Has anybody heard of the shogun or shogunate or any sort of background in this type of history? Yes, Brian. Brian has. Anyone else know? There was a TV show, I think, way back in the day called Shogun. It was a really good show, or at least it was to my young eyes. But the shogun system is very similar to a feudal European system. And so in a feudal European system, who's up at the very top? Anybody? Irfan. In European society, who's at the very top?
The king.
That's right, the king. And underneath them, you have.
Wasn't it the Pope?
Well, the Pope is also there. Yes, Jackie. The Pope is sort of above everybody. But in each individual feudal system, you have a king up top, then you have nobility, the knights, et cetera, all the way down. The pyramid of Shogun era Japan looks very, very similar to this. You have an emperor up top, then court nobility, then a shogun, then daimyo, samurai, et cetera, going all the way down. Except in the shogun system, the emperor is basically a figurehead. Much like the Chinese, the Japanese felt that that the emperor was basically a conduit to the heavens. That the emperor was had the mediation force between the ancestors and the present day. And so the way that they justified not having the emperor charge was like, he's too important to be involved in day-to-day tasks. So the emperor and the noble court, they'll stay in the palace. They don't need to concern themselves. And so the shogun will take charge. And basically the shogun is the leader of the most important clan at the time. And underneath him are the other clan members, the daimyo, the other clan leaders, that basically create this system where where the shogun lords over the rest of the nobles. And underneath the daimyo, underneath the shogun, are samurai that are basically their soldiers, their minor nobility. And then underneath them, you have peasants, craftsmen, and merchants. So one of the interesting things that I always find about the shogun system is how peasants are seen as above craftsmen and merchants. How during traditional in this traditional society, making money, making goods is sort of looked down upon, whereas cultivating food and being basically being a soldier are seen as much more noble. So it's sort of an inverse system from Europe, where craftsmen and merchants would be above the peasants. And so when we're looking at the rise of the Tokugawa, we have to look at what happened before that. And we're looking at Sengoku, Japan. And Sengoku basically means the warring states, or the times of war, great wars. So this is the time where the Ashikaga shogunate is weakened. Other rulers are springing up. There's rebellions. You have an actual war, a rebellion by samurai and peasants. As samurai are ignored, as peasants are bear the brunt of bad decisions by the shogun and the daimyo. And so you have this revolt known as the Onin War. And during that time, the capital city of Kyoto is actually destroyed. And this is where the capital moves from Kyoto to present-day Tokyo eventually. So Tokyo is not the traditional Japanese capital up until the 1400s. It's a relatively new place. And so the Ashikaga shogunate falls apart. The people that really make out like bandits here are arms manufacturers, weapons, dealers, This is a time of a lot of upheaval, a lot of change in society, and basically you have the rise of the popular myth of the samurai. Whenever people think of Japan, one of the first things they think about are like ninjas and samurai and martial arts, things like that, from Kurosawa, the movies of Kurosawa, to anime and even video games, especially video games. You can't throw a rock in a GameStop without hitting a samurai video game these days. There's so many of them. But this time period is one that's very, very romanticized, and it's one that sort of gives a lot more credence to samurai than they really had, because they were basically warriors, but they had such a code. They have such an importance that they're very much like the chivalrous knight in European history. You know, the knights in their armor that ride and fight for the goodness and chivalry, things like that. The samurai are seen a lot like that, and they really have a fascinating history, and one that I found this nice video that gives a good history of it. So let me go ahead and boot that video up. Let's see. Hope it works. There you go. Let me share the screen. Let me. All right, there you go.
Samurai.
Good to go.
In the Heian period, the imperial court relied on agriculture produced in distant estates. The wealthy landowners of these estates hired warriors to defend themselves from raids by local chieftains. By the 12th century, political power had shifted significantly away from the emperor. The Genpei War of 1180 to 1185 pitted the Taira clan, with sworn loyalty to the emperor, against the Minamoto clan, and the Minamoto's victory established the Kamakura Shogunate, a hereditary military dictatorship. The samurai warrior trained by serving under his master and following a strict code called Bushido, the way of the warrior. In battle, the warrior would decapitate his defeated enemy and mount the head on a spike. For a samurai who was facing defeat or dishonor, seppuku or harakiri was performed. This involved the warrior committing suicide by cutting into his belly with a dagger. As part of Bushido, samurai who had lost their master were also expected to commit harakiri. Those who did not became ronin or drifters. Often there was stigma attached to being a masterless ronin, and many found other ways to make a living with their swords, becoming mercenaries or turning to crime. Samurai were experts in fighting both on horseback and on the ground. They used a variety of weapons: bows and arrows, spears, and eventually guns. However, their main and most symbolic weapon was the sword. In the late 13th century, Masamune Okazaki invented the unique dual structure of soft and hard steel that is one of the key characteristics of the katana. The sword came to have great significance, and eventually samurai would carry two types: the katana, a long sword, and the wakizashi, a short sword. In the 15th century, the shogun's power was waning, and a century-long period of fighting for dominance between local lords began, the Warring States period. Oda Nobunaga succeeded in uniting half of the clans in the late 16th century, but he was betrayed by one of his vassals and committed seppuku before national unification was complete. Stability was finally brought in the 17th century with the beginning of the Tokugawa shogunate, headed by Tokugawa Ieyasu. At this point, the social order was also frozen, with samurai at the top of the social hierarchy. However, despite their high social position, the material well-being of many samurai began to decline. With relatively stable peace, the importance of martial skills declined, and many samurai took on careers as bureaucrats or teachers. Subscribe for more history videos. It's Simple History Japan.
So that is a quick little history on the samurai. The samurai, they did have the some of the best military uniforms. I think that really is what really attracted Western traders and Western merchants when they made it to Japan. That's what made it such a fascinating thing to them, the samurai. And that's really one of the reasons why you have them in popular culture, being so so elevated. But really, as the video said, pretty quickly into the early modern era, by the 15th century, the samurai had begun to slip down in importance, and they really basically became either bureaucrats or mercenaries by the end of this. So the samurai have a unique place in Japanese history, and I think they're really because of their traditional importance, because of this sort of warrior code that really taps into a lot of nostalgia. It's sort of maintained its importance, even though the samurai themselves didn't maintain importance. And so during the after the Warring States period, as the video said, you had the rise of the three unifiers, the first one being Oda Nobunaga. And Oda Nobunaga, he unifies most of the people, but he's betrayed by one of his retainers as he's going to a sacred tea ceremony. So he can't have his weapons with him. He can't really have an army with him, and so he's betrayed, and he is forced to commit seppuku. And he is forced to kill himself, and he makes sure to ask his second to not let them get his decapitated head, and so his body is actually burned. And so after that, Toyotomi Hideyoshi declares that he is going to get vengeance for Oda Nobunaga, and so he and Tokugawa Ieyasu, Toyotomi and Tokugawa, are able to come together and finish what the Oda clan had started. And one more thing that I forgot to note at the beginning: whenever you look at Japanese names and Chinese names as well, but their family name is always first. So Oda Nobunaga, his name would be Nobunaga, but his clan would be Oda. So just in case you guys get confused by when their names are thrown out there. So Tokugawa, the Tokugawa clan and the Toyotomi clan come together, and they begin and everyone defers to Hideyoshi, who is Nobunaga's second in command. And this is where Hideyoshi loses the faith of the people, because he really has this idea that the best way to unify Japan is to find a new enemy. And that enemy is a traditional enemy. That enemy is China. And so he, having a connection to Korea, having a claim to Korea as their own, the Japanese forces are going to launch an invasion into Korea in 1592. And this does not go well for the Japanese. There's a quick stalemate, as not only are the Chinese fighting back, but the Koreans are fighting back. And then pretty soon the Koreans begin to fight against the Chinese as well. And so you have basically a three army war. And so because of that, no one can win. And it's a lose-lose situation. But you do start seeing the beginnings of what will become Pacific warfare. You have gunner nests on islands. You have hidden traps throughout the throughout the Pacific. There are over 2,300 islands in Japan. And in Korea, there are a couple hundred other islands as well. And so you have these gunner nests set up and basically becomes a war of attrition. So eventually you have a stalemate. The Ming, as I noted earlier, the Ming are going to ignore the North. Because of this, they spent too much money. Japan is going to basically, Hideyoshi is going to gamble and Japan will lose. And basically what they say is that that Toyotomi Hideyoshi goes into a depression because he really thought they were going to win easily. And he goes into a depression and basically dies from depression. And basically wastes away. And so after that, Tokugawa Ieyasu takes over, leading to the beginning of the Tokugawa shogunate, or the Edo period. And it is here that you really start seeing that, as the video said, the decline of the shogun, of the samurai. You also have the rise of merchants and artisans, and really the beginning of a more modern Japan. You have the beginning of a start to a modernization of Japan, as they begin to come out of the old traditional ways and begin to move forward away from that. You also have the beginnings of great art and culture, things like the wave, things like I noted in the lecture, that you start seeing illustrated books at this time, here in the 1600s, stories that eventually become the Japanese manga that we know of today. They start back in the 1600s, these illustrated novels that get more and more fantastical and more integrated art and words. But if you ever wondered where anime and manga come from, it's really here around the 1600s. So it's a really much older form of literature and art than most people would think. You also have the reintroduction of this old form of poetry. You have the reintroduction of old art, but you also have one of my favorite things, and this is just a personal preference, and I always like to show this off because this is some of the most fun things that I have. Does anybody know what Kabuki theater is? Kabuki theater is one of the most fun things that I have ever really seen. And I'm going to share another video real quick.
actor Bando Mitsugoro X. Kabuki actors apply all their makeup themselves. The red stripe makeup represents how people's blood vessels pop out when they feel explosive emotion. This makes it obvious that the situation is extreme. We use makeup to clearly show that moment when the character is feeling something with incredible intensity. When he becomes enraged, for example. It's intended to make that easier to grasp. Understanding the symbolism behind kabuki makeup helps you to enjoy the form's stock characters.
So that's Kabuki theater. That's just something that I've really always really found fascinating, probably because I saw it as a young kid, was like, what is this? But actually, as Brian noted, there are no female performers because this was actually started by females. Females would actually perform this. And so the Tokugawa, basically the morality police came out and said, women shouldn't be doing this. And so men took over. Actually, young men, like underage men and underage kids, would dress up as women. And so then the morality police came and said, you can't have underage kids doing this. This is corrupting them. And so then middle-aged kids said, as Elijah said, that guy is much older than he looks in the makeup. But it is a sort of a satirical comedy that basically makes fun of the strict social hierarchy that exists in society, makes fun of a lot of the superstitious beliefs in Japanese society, and really it's sort of like a Shakespearean farce where everything is just exaggerated. It's a really fascinating art form, and it's just something that I've always really looked at as being indicative of this time period, where even though there was an official stance against satire and everything, because it was so popular with the masses, it was hard to tamp down. And this society that we're looking at begins to become upended, and so the Tokugawa shogunate, the people in charge begin to clamp down on it, and you start having the separation of classes that makes it more of a caste system than more traditional class system. So it's very hard to move between the caste system, and it's very, very hard to it's very hard to actually intermarry between the system, between the different classes. You have this real taboo against marrying outside of your system, outside of your class. You have this real stigma against against women being independent, especially in the samurai class. Women are seen more as possessions or as trophies than as people. So you start seeing more of a conservative ideology takes place, and you start seeing the rise of a much more traditional, atomic family here. The parents and the 2.5 kids that they have. So you have this nuclear family. You have less of an emphasis on extended families so that you could really control your own home. And then you also have a lot more control on peasants as well. As the economy grows, as more food is needed for trade and for just workers, they begin to overwork the rice fields often, and that leads to a lot of uprisings due to famine and starvation, things like that. So you start seeing family and society begin to change, and quickly the Tokugawa government is going to try and stop those changes. And so you have the rise of the West happening, coinciding with the rise of the Tokugawa, and the Tokugawa begin to trade with the West, mainly trading munitions and other manufactured goods. You also see a lot of new art styles come in, a lot of new clothing styles. Here you have a very, very loud outfit here, and a very nice looking dog. I like this painting because of the dog. It's really nice. So Western clothing, or at least what they feel looks like Western clothing, it becomes much more fashionable. Western art, Western goods, and most importantly, Western religion becomes more important in Japan. As you begin to open the ports up to the Portuguese, Spanish, and this leads to Catholicism coming in and taking hold in Japan. You have a lot of the daimyo converting. You have, oh shoot, I forgot this guy's name, but he actually, they're the same guy. He makes it, he becomes the first ambassador from Japan to the Vatican City, and he actually makes it to the Americas, makes it to New Spain, and then comes back in the early 1500s. But you start seeing a lot of people becoming Catholics, and then the fervent Catholic Portuguese and Spanish actually begin to destroy temples like they did in and destroy shrines like they did in China, and that angers the daimyo, or that angers the shogun, that angers the traditional daimyo, and they order out all of the Christians. They order out all Catholics, everybody out, you know, and there are a group of 27 that refuse to go. They're known as the 27 Martyrs of Japan. They are tried by the Edo court, and they are sentenced to death in the manner that the Edo court feels is deemed necessary, and that is by and appropriate, and that is by crucifixion. And so all 27 are crucified and actually stabbed through as sort of a symbolic as the symbolic punishment for them. And so the expulsion of Christians leads to a closing off of Japan. Japan is actually going to close itself off up until the 19th century. They will refuse to trade with the West, at least officially. You will have the beginning of smuggling and the beginning of a black market in Japan, but for the most part, you have a closing off of Japan from the rest of the world. And you have a closing off now because China has limited itself to just one port. Japan has refused to trade at all with the West. You now have this this complete erasure of the East in the global the global chain of history. So the East now has given up on this idea of competing with the West. So it's really fascinating that they go from 1420 Chinese having this chance to make it to the Americas, to in the end of the 1600s, both China and Japan are basically closed off to the West. This is allowing the West to basically, by the West I mean at this point Europe, from having this global domination, which is what happens. So this is where we leave off this first section of class. After this, we're going to move back to Europe, and we'll be looking at next week. We'll be doing the one of my favorite lectures, which is the kings and queens of Europe. So we'll go through, look at the Spanish crown. We'll look at the Habsburgs, the beautiful inbred Habsburgs. We'll look at the kings and queens of England, the rise of the Louis in France, and then the week after that we'll go look at the colonies themselves. So that's where we'll go. After here in a little while, the exam will open up. Chapters 9 and 10, as I said. If you have any questions about the exam, just let me know. If you need to talk to me after class, I'll be here for a while after class. But so you'll have the exam, and then there will be a discussion question, but it's basically, sort of a check-in question, see how people are doing, just see what people are getting out of the class so far, especially since we are all online. So do we have any questions before we end this session? No, everybody's going to ace the exam, right? Nothing but A's. There you go. Yeah, I like that confidence. Okay. Well, if there are no questions, just everyone have a great week. Email me if you need anything. I'll try to get back to you ASAP. Thank you, everybody. You guys have a great week and great weekend. We'll see you next Wednesday.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.